Everybody, it's Jeremy. Welcome back to Lucid's 2022 Tournament Game 4, where we are playing Nazca. This is turn 109, and this is going to be a little bit different than how we normally do turns, because this is basically the end of the game. We're just going to pop off to the map, and we can see, whereas last turn our Dominion encompassed most of this area, it now only encompasses Forgotten Woods, Austin Glen, Ermithia, and Baral, and none of them are especially high. So we're absolutely dead next turn to Dom push. There's nothing that we can do about it. We were preaching everywhere that we could last turn to try to forestall it as long as possible. Trying to do a little, like, silly thing with our god, but just not gonna work. So that means that 109 and 110 are basically nothing is happening in these turns. Vanheim's not even really attacking us. We're not really even attacking Vanheim. There's a couple of small little engagements just messing around here or there, right? But nothing that is of real consequence, because the real consequence was the attacks on Mudwood, Cern, and Satala, which were repulsed, and now that Pelagia and Ulm have been Dom killed, there's only one place for Vanheim's Dominion to go, and that's into us, and so we are super duper dead. So we're gonna go ahead and end this. That is 109. I'm gonna pop over and adjust to 110 real quick, and we're gonna watch the stuff, the history of the game, and then we'll talk about a bunch of different things. This is basically gonna be the final video in the series, because there's not really anything to report on from the turn files themselves. So we're just going to talk about the game itself as a whole. So this is turn 110. Got a disease demon attack, major disturbance, mental attack, some horrors thrown at us. We took back Forest of Pine. We got a bunch of vengeful waters all over the place, but we can see we were permanently vanquished. We got Dom killed there. And that's that. So turn 110 is a Dom kill victory for Vanheim. First and foremost, congratulations to the Vanheim player, Fulik. Played a great game. Very, very good. Very well done. Throughout the entirety of the game, they did a good job playing the game, but also they were a pleasant person to play the game with. Right? They were cordial, they were engaging, they were fun, they had a good demeanor about themselves, they weren't pushy or super manipulative, they weren't arsey about things. They would try to, get an agenda going, obviously. They're trying to win the game, so that's how this stuff works. But they weren't assholes about it, which can be a bit refreshing in the Dominions community, because honestly, there's a lot of players. I love playing this game, and I love playing this game multiplayer, but it can be a bit rough sometimes playing this game multiplayer, because there can be a lot of really assholish people playing the game that make it unfun to play for various different reasons. Sometimes it's because they're just assholes, sometimes it's because they stall or stale or what have you, right? There's all different types of people, all different types of reasons that multiplayer in Dominions 5 can be complicated. Fulik was none of those individuals, or none of those styles of people. Was fun to play with throughout the entirety of the game, so kudos to them, hats off, very well deserved victory, and a lot of fun to play through. So let's watch. We're going to watch through the history. And then maybe actually do... yeah, I can pause. Okay, so we start off with good old early spring in the year 0 of the Ascension Wars. Poor little old Nazca boy, sandwiched between Ashdod, Vanheim, Agartha, and Yes. So this is gonna go well. You know what? Actually, let's just watch let's watch centered on Vanheim, a run of the game, unpaused. We're just gonna watch Vanheim go through, and then we'll come back and we'll actually watch Nazca. We'll watch us, and we'll pause and talk about little different parts of the game, etc., etc. So, Vanheim expansion. Vanheim expands so well. Look at that. Up into 3 expansions per turn, pretty early on. Spring of year 1, everything is mostly okay. Pretty decent expansion. Vanarus actually did really good expansion as well. So it is here that the attack begins on Nazca, and Vanheim joins in partially in that. And then there's a disagreement with Ashdod over the actual borders of what's going on. And then Vanheim decides, fuck it, he's going to attack Ashdod. So he goes into Ashdod, probably knowing that there's already an engagement between Jotunheim and fucking Nabah, right? Goes into Ashdod and really does a number on Ashdod. Raids the crap out of him, wins a couple of really, really strong engagements, and then holds. And it's at this point, right, like, we have come back, right? We joined with Ulm to fight Agartha, so we've kind of come back in the game. And it's at this point that we're like, okay, well, now Vanheim is a bit of a problem. So the war, I say quote unquote war, the betrayal, the dark betrayal, right, of Jotunheim, as Ulm and I take the Ashdod lands and basically leave Jotunheim to fight against Vanheim on their own, which goes poorly. Vanheim wins. It does take them quite a long time to actually finish things off. But this is at this point that Vanheim has fully consolidated. And I want to say it is around here. Yeah, so we when I say we, I mean Ulm and Nazca and I. Nazca, we are Nazca. Ulm and I decide that we're going to attack Vanheim. And then Vanarus comes in, Arco comes in, and Ulm goes for the throne rush instead, which creates a very different situation, which, I mean, creates a situation where Arco feels compelled to turn on Ulm and prevent Ulm, right? Like, get involved in preventing Ulm from winning. So then Ulm is set against Arco, Van is set against Arco, Van goes on Vanarus, Vanheim goes on Vanarus, and this is where Vanda's gotten out of control at this point, right? Because of not taking... I actually think we had a legitimate opportunity to take Vanheim on after Jotunheim fell, when it was Ulm, Vanarus, Arco, and I. But Ulm's play for the thrones really set that in the other direction. And it's at this point we're fighting Pelagia underwater. Vanheim takes all over Vanarus, starts to take over all of Arco, and the game's over. Game's been over for the last 2 years, probably since year 6. The end, I think the scenario where Ulm went for that throne play was probably the last really big point where it might have been out of Vanheim's hands if we played it correctly. But after that point, I think was pretty much over. Seeing the big chunks of people just disappear due to Dom kill is a lot of fun. We see... all of a sudden, all of the blue and all of the pink, it's just gone. Oh no. And then it's us, gone. That was a lot of fun. Let's drill in and actually take a look at the beginnings of this game. So we're going to watch our stuff. Talk about each of the various different stages. So we have expansion, expansion, expansion. Our expansion was very slow. We had very high attrition. I did not enjoy it. But we did still establish decent borders for ourselves. We finished up. You can see finished up, pretty much finished up, mostly finished up, finished up. We had good borders. We just didn't finish establishing those borders until way late, right? We didn't have any stuff going up. Although, I guess technically we had one fort here, a fort here, a fort here. We were a little behind the curve, but not super behind the curve. And this is the coalition triggering. So let's talk about this initial part of the game, right? We took Nazca because we lucked into a first pick in the tournament, which was fun. I would pick Nazca again, honestly. Even though I know it painted a target on my back, I knew it was going to paint a target on my back, I would pick it again just to paint that same target on my back and have some fun, right? I went in with the concept of let's do a very classic build for Nazca because I had felt like I had something to prove. I don't know that I proved that, but I think I didn't prove it for the wrong reasons, basically. The idea was that I wanted to go in with a build that was very classic for Nazca, to show that I don't think Nazca is the end-all be-all crazy thing that people treat it to be anymore. I do think it used to be, right? Because it had a couple of things that were very broken about it, and now those things have been nerfed, and they're not as significant factors anymore. I do still think that Nazca is a very powerful nation and has some very powerful things going for it, but as far as things going for the meta, I think it's perfectly serviceable in the late game with a player that has a clear concept of where they're going and what they want to do to win in the late game. I didn't have a clear concept of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do in the late game, so I was kind of scatterbrained all over the place, which means that I didn't take advantage of some of the things that I should have taken advantage of. So I think basically it's a scenario of I think old Nazca was a superpower regardless of whose hands they were in. I think current Nazca is really strong in the hands of an experienced, good player, right? But still not end-all be-all. They can be dealt with, right? Whereas in the hands of just a mediocre player, I think they're just okay, right? They have some interesting things, but they also have things that are very punitive or difficult to deal with, or just not that strong. So yeah, I think that's kind of like the summation. That's kind of what I have come to. I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for that. People are gonna be like, "Oh, this is so strong. X is so strong. Y is so strong." Yeah, but I look at other nations and I'm like, so what? Like, oh, they can do all of this Supaya generation. I'm like, yeah, Supayas are cool, but they're not the end-all be-all of existence. Other nations can also generate a lot of sacreds as well, right? You're not generating a crap ton of Huacas, which are better. You're not generating a crap ton of Sun Guard, which are better, right? Supayas are cool, but they serve a very specific purpose, and they get deleted by very specific things. There are way stronger sacreds out there. Oh, they can generate lots of long dead. Cool. So can a lot of other nations. I think the one leg that people really have to stand on when complaining about Nazca is the Royal Malqui and its innate caster ability. But I think, honestly, it is expensive and dangerous to utilize. Can it be a game changer? Absolutely. Should I have focused on it? Absolutely. If I had, then this might have been a different game. I don't think it would have been, but it might have been a different game. But, like, the concept of just because Royal Malquis inherently have innate spellcaster 2 that meaning that they are just the end-all be-all and should immediately be coalitioned, etc., etc., I think is just wrong. I do not think that that's correct, especially since, and I've said this before, right? Like, I think if you're worried about a Nazca getting to late game, great, fight that Nazca early on, where they are not that strong. If Agartha had just 1v1'd me, they would have won. If Ashdod had just 1v1'd me, they would have won. If Vanheim had just 1v1'd me, they would have won. Period. Right? Like, any of those nations, I say that. We might have been able to beat Agartha depending on the layout. We were not going to beat Vanheim or Ashdod in the beginning of the game. Their sacreds are just significantly better than ours. And the setup was just significantly better. If we had a different bless, it's questionable, depending on the scenario, but unlikely, right? We would still probably lose. So, I think Nazca is actually in a perfectly acceptable place of power right now in the meta of the game. They've got some really cool tricks, but they're not an especially strong late-game Blood Nation or late-game Astral Nation. Right? I mean, they do have plenty of Astral. They're perfectly fine, but their Astral is expensive. It's hard for them to just generate a shit ton of Astral units. So they have really big strengths, but those strengths are very specific, and they're not the broad general meta that I think a lot of players rely on. That gets very strong based in the late game. You get what I'm saying, right? So anyways, that is all to come back to this concept of it's the middle of year 1. I don't know why it says year 0, year 1, etc., etc. It's in the second year of the game, and this is when the coalition against Nazca fires, right? The idea being, I say coalition, it was really only 2 people with a third person vulturing. But the reason why I refer to it as a coalition is because there were multiple other members in the game egging it on, right? With the concept of, you neighbors of Nazca need to take Nazca out immediately. So that happened. I think that is an interesting effect on the game, though, because what ended up happening was, rather than one person just coming and fighting me, or even just a 2v1 happening, what ended up happening is it kind of galvanized other players against those players that were targeting me like that. Ulm, for example, even Vanheim, though Vanheim vultured me, Vanheim was more than willing to not fight me. They just didn't want their neighbors to get super big for free, right? So they took lands off of me, but as soon as I was back in the game, they were like, yeah, okay, whatever. I don't have any beef with you. So it was a very interesting scenario. Picking Nazca put me in this weird position with, it was a target on my back, and people went for it, but it also made other people in the game sympathetic and or annoyed, right, by that kind of like situation. So while it immediately made me public enemy number 1, it also gained me certain allies or support. Okay, so that I thought was really, really interesting. Our interception of Ashdod was a huge misplay for us, and also kind of a misplay for Ashdod, because we did murder their commanders, and it did delay Ashdod's invasion, which gave Agartha the impetus in the game, and gave Vanheim the ability to fight Ashdod, right? Or really kind of like the timing. They already had the ability to fight, but the timing to fight Ashdod. If Ashdod had a strong army and invaded all of my northern lands, then Vanheim potentially has less of a easy time getting into a conflict with Ashdod. So anyways, that was a very interesting scenario. That was just a bad call on my part, right? Like, we had scouted their bless previously. I thought that they were maybe just going for like a more scales, late game oriented play for Ashdod. They were not. They were doing a dormant blood bond regeneration, which destroyed me. But at the same time, it also destroyed them, right? It doing that was the very reason why they couldn't afford more units to fight Vanheim, why they couldn't have better research to fight Vanheim, and that's the danger of the tactic, right? If you're gonna go some sort of Hellbless like that, and you don't stomp a mud hole in the person that you go after immediately, right? Simply, honestly, right here where we attacked them in Pack Woods, or we intercepted them in Pack Woods, delaying their timetable, and I think we killed like 4 units or something like that. I think they were mostly commanders, but still, that delaying that timetable means Ashdod doesn't get to Nazca, right? Which means Ashdod's not paying for the bless that they have taken. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like the most hell blessy thing in the world. They could have been fine, but you pay for that type of stuff, right? We paid for that type of stuff. We paid dearly for it. So, that whole scenario happens, and then we're gonna fast forward into the next couple situations. We call Yiss in and say, "Hey, Yiss, eat our coast," because they'd been friendly to us, and we were like, I would rather Yiss eat portions of us and have a better game than we just give that over to Agartha and Ashdod. Ashdod takes the Mighty Pillars, which was our first fort, and then they immediately begin. There is a dispute, a diplomatic dispute. I'm not going to take sides on either one, but there is a diplomatic dispute between Ashdod and Vanheim over who gets this territory, and so they go to war. So immediately, I'm no longer at war with oh, did we already it already happened? Yes. Yeah, because we never actually lose Nazca. So I'm no longer really at war with Ashdod. I was never really at war with Vanheim. I'm now only really at war with Agartha, and this is where we pull the very cheesy unkillable god strategy, but the fact that we pulled it on a Frostfather really felt really good. So we just went in there with, like, we traded a bunch of people for a lot of gear, and we targeted very specific research. We went in there with, like, multiple fluffers. We iron skin, moss bodied, and did a couple of other things to basically make it to where Agartha, who was just really using troops and magma children, that being the other thing is we had a shit ton of fire resistance. They just couldn't kill us, and they weren't resistant to their own fire, so they just burned their army down. And that was a lot of fun. That was one of those aha moments. But never did I really think when that happened that we were back in the game. And we talked about that, right? Like in the turn videos that I produced for this game, that was like turn 24. Turn 24, turn 25, turn 26, all the way up to like 30 plus, right? We were like, we're not back in the game. We're not back in the game. We're just being punitive towards Agartha. Someone's going to come kill us. Well, so we fast forward a little bit. We start to take back our territory from Agartha. And during this, the war between Ashdod and Vanheim continues. Ulm, which I've kind of glossed over, has been fighting Agartha with us during this time period. A couple of big battles there. So we did a big number on Agartha's army in Nazca. Ulm does a big number on Agartha's army down here in their border. And then Ashdod and Vanheim are fighting through this whole thing, which is really cool. I am communicating with both of them and being like, "Hey, yo, I'm gonna yoink this province," and Vanheim, again, very gracious about it, just like, yeah, fine, whatever. Ashdod, very annoyed by it. I think at this point in the game, Ashdod had kind of seen the writing on the wall. They lost a big fight against Vanheim. We commented heavily on that, how well designed that fight was for Vanheim. And then Vanheim had been raiding the crap out of them. So I think at that point, Ashdod had gotten annoyed with the fact that Ulm had gone in on Agartha and ruined the kill on me, because if he hadn't, then maybe Agartha would be fighting Vanheim right now with Ashdod, or maybe Ulm was supposed to fight Vanheim with them, who knows, right? But it ended up in a scenario where, like, I spoke to Ashdod about taking some of my provinces back, and they were very like, I don't care. Do whatever. This is BS. So we start to come back. We win another pretty large victory against Agartha. Ulm wins another pretty large victory against Agartha, and then Ulm takes the Agarthan capital. We help facilitate killing the last army of Agartha, and Agartha is the first player to actually die, as I think... Oh, no, they might not have been the first player to die. Okay, so this is what's happening on land. Let's head back here real quick. So in the sea, because this is such a huge influencing factor, the sea of this game was so fucking crazy, and then went nowhere. So we have good old Pelagia, Ys, and Oceania, and the war starts early between Oceania and Pelagia, and between Ys and Pelagia. But Pelagia pulls it the fuck out. 2v1s, as far as I'm aware. Anyone who was actually an original player in the game who can detail more about this war, feel free to, like, drop in and leave some comments, because the underwater players were the players that I was speaking to the least. So I did not really get a lot of a play-by-play of what was happening there. But it looks, in watching the playback, it looks like Pelagia was at war with Oceania and with Ys. But they focus their energies on Ys, take Ys out, and then focus their energies on Oceania. And it looks like Pelagia legitimately 2v1s Oceania and Ys. And it is at that point, right, like, people are calling the game at this point, right? It is the end of year 3, right? So we're closing in on turn 36, right? And I remember having conversations with people basically saying, yeah, that's probably game, right? Pelagia has taken the whole ocean, and they are a 3-cap nation at turn 36. Agartha's dead. Nazca is limping, right? No one has the ability to challenge them underwater. They're going to just take a couple turns, consolidate, build everything up, and then we're going to get something like an Arcane Nexus or Wish Factories or things like that coming online, and then no one's going to be able to challenge them, especially considering there's just thrones, all 6 thrones that they need, boom, 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 on the coastline, right? Because of the way that this ocean was designed. So I remember those conversations. It was very, very interesting. We established a coast guard and everything. It was really, really cool. But my God, if things don't work out the way that people think they're going to work out. So, back to the land scenario, talking about what's going on in Nazca. We enter ye old alliance with Ulm at this point. We had already been in an alliance with them fighting Agartha, but it's really at this point where we're like, okay, we're gonna stick it out together. We're really gonna try to do this thing, and we establish with Jotunheim. Okay, the 3 of us are going to attack Vanheim. And I've talked about this at great length, so I'm going to try to keep this one succinct. Yes, we stab Jotunheim in the back. Yes, if all 3 of us had attacked Vanheim, Vanheim would have died, probably, and Vanheim would not have won the game. However, I still stand by my decisions, because at this moment, right, in the game, again, around the end of the 3rd year, turn 36, we are incredibly weak. Remember, at turn 24, we were down to 2 provinces, technically. We never lost Golm, and we had our capital, right? So we from turn 24 until turn 36, which is not technically even turn 36 yet, I think actually it is turn 36. We were getting our territories back. And we still don't even have all of our territory back, but we have added a few Agarthan territories. So we are basically slightly bigger than we were at like turn 12, right? We have no ports. We have no research. We have no economy because we have a crazy fucking bless, right? Like, I had nothing. I had a stack, question mark, and a half that could fight anything, and they would die to 20 vans. We had no... we did technically have we did technically have a fort over in Omia. Where are we at? Late winter. Yeah, here we go. So I do want to reiterate, right? Like, that if we had participated, if we had fought Vanheim with Jotunheim and with Ulm, would Vanheim have lost? I do think so, yes. I do think they would have lost, and I think, you know, things would have gone from there. Would we have gained anything? Probably not. Probably not any more than what we gained with the deal that we made from them. Because we take Packwoods, Pavonia, Dutrandine, Mushwood, whatever this province is, Rid. We secure Olifa for us, right? Which is a pretty big deal. We take a mule back, right? Also nice. So we take Old Man Mountains back, right? Like, all of these are things that we take based off of the deal that we made with Vanheim. And here's the kicker. I keep saying, if we had fought with Jotunheim and Ulm, we would have beaten Vanheim. Well, hindsight's a bitch, ain't it? Because we know that Ulm wasn't going to fight either. So if we had thrown in and we had just fought Vanheim with Jotunheim, I actually think Vanheim just would have killed us, and it would have taken them longer to beat Jotunheim, but I think they still would have beaten Jotunheim, right? Again, Vanheim is a very, very good nation at raiding. It is extremely, unless you have a good way to deal with them, they make it very, very difficult to survive in a war with them because they choke you out from raiding all of your resources, right? We had 2 forts. He would have put an elf in every single one of our territories, an elf that we couldn't really kill very well, again, mind you. And I'll take the blame for that with the bless that we had. But it is what it is, right? So I still do think, and I know people are going to say that I'm wrong, but I still do think that the deal that we made with Vanheim was the best deal that we could make at the current point in time. And I made the deal because I thought, right, that what was going to happen was that Jotunheim and Ulm were going to actually fight Vanheim. I was going to safely take territory away from Vanheim, which would make Vanheim weaker, right? And that after 5 or 10 turns of fighting Vanheim together, Jotunheim and Ulm would break their power. Because Jotunheim and Ulm did have the ability to break Vanheim's power at this point in the game together. I know that what I'm basically saying is it's Ulm's fault. It's not my fault. I get that. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. I am kind of saying that as the weakest partner in this quote-unquote triumvirate type situation, and Ulm being kind of the strongest partner at this point in time, right? That it made sense for me to take the easy deal and still reduce Vanheim's power. But Ulm also took the easy deal and left Jotunheim out to dry. That being said, I had a great time playing with the Ulmish player, so there is no shade throwing. There's no hard feelings. There's no shade being thrown at them or anything like that. I'm just defending my choices because I do think that it was the wisest choice, both initially and in hindsight, right? Because if we had gone in and we were like, no, we're dedicated to Jotunheim, we would have gotten killed. We would have been dead at turn 48 or less, right? The issue with where we were at this point in the game is that Van could have turned on us and killed us, wiped the floor with us in 6 turns, and then we would be dead entirely, and then Van would take some hits in the meantime, right, from Jotunheim. Wouldn't take hits from Ulm because Ulm wasn't doing the fighting. And then they would have been able to just turn on Jotunheim with the resources of the Nazcan lands and the Vanheim lands, if that makes sense, right? So that's the long and short of it. In the meantime, we'll just go ahead and fast forward through the scenario. There's wars raging, by the way, over here between Vanarus and Arco. And it goes, I want to say, for a very long time back and forth. And then Arco also goes at Nabaz. So, again, a lot of, like, what feels like 2 1v2s. Successful 1v2s in the sea, successful 1v2s via Arco. I'm not going to call Vanheim's scenario a successful 1v3 because he wasn't fighting versus 3 people. He was fighting versus 1. He sold territory to 2 players and then fought against 1 player. So that's what happens. We take the territory, kind of like allowed us around Ashdod. Ulm comes in and takes the northern lands of Ashdod, and we are wealthier for it. By the time we have that happen, though, Jotunheim is dead, and it is at this point in the game where things really, I do think, start to hit a critical juncture. My mindset changes from up until this point, right? Up until basically the Great Betrayal. Sorry, Grippa. Up until the Great Betrayal, I'd basically been playing with this concept of like, oh, we're still dead, right? Like we may not have lost the game yet, but we're still dead. We have no chance of getting really back into the game. It is at the point of the Great Betrayal, when we have taken lands back, that I start to go with the concept of, okay, hold up. If we play our cards right, we might not be dead anymore. And the part of that plan is, if with Ulm's aid and Arco's aid, we fight Vanheim, and we take portions of the Van territory. Ulm takes portions of the fucking Jotunheim territory. What happens is we get stronger, Ulm gets stronger, Arco gets stronger, and then we have this kind of like triple check scenario where each one of us is on land and strong and concerning each other, right? And that at some point, Pelagia is going to become an issue, and maybe we can all turn and focus on Pelagia, and sometime during that mayhem, we might be able to come online and sneak a victory, or just come online and actually earn a victory, okay? So that was the plan. That was the idea, right? We betrayed Jotunheim, we failed to actually take the fight to Van, but this time, we were going to do it. With Ulm, with Arco, with Vanarus a little bit, right? Adding into the concept, we were going to take the fight to Van. And that is when Ulm gets us again. Ulm goes for the throne rush, right? And As soon as Ulm goes for the throne rush, I never attacked Ulm, right? So I was still in this point of like, Van was talking to me, Arca was talking to me, I think Vanarus was talking to me. Everyone was basically like in the scenario of like, yo, you need to turn on Ulm now. And in hindsight, I probably should have turned on Ulm, because if I turned on Ulm with Van, I might have gotten stronger faster. However, I had already betrayed one person in this game, so I was trying not to betray another. Even if they were kind of betraying me by going for the win. But regardless, right, like, Van goes for the throne play, Ulm goes for the throne play. Van is already resisting Ulm, and that just gives Van easy negotiating power to have Arco join in on Ulm to rebuff the throne plays, but then also be at war with Ulm rather than being at war with Vanheim. Now, in fairness, it ends up being Arco being at war with both Ulm and Vanheim, right? But that was not the initial concept, right? It wasn't like Van didn't go to the negotiating table saying, hey, fight, like, rebuff Ulm and fight Ulm, and then I'll fight you. Right? Like, that wasn't the play. But what I think that was a misplay on Ulm's part. Because I do think I think it would have been a long and painful war. But I do think Ulm, Arco, and I would have been able to take down Van eventually. It would have hurt a lot, and it would have taken us a long time. But I do think we would have taken down Van eventually. I think Ulm's mindset was that the longer this goes, the less relevant they become. A 3-cap Pelagia, a 2-cap Arco, potentially going to be a 3-cap Arco, right? Like, that becomes a problem for Ulm to deal with, even if they are as large as those individuals. Pelagia and Arco in the late game, Van in the late game, are all terrors, right? Ulm in the late game is not as much of a terror. Nazca in the late game, right, is I think a terror comparatively to Ulm. So I think I understand Ulm's concept here of this was the time to do it, let's do it now. I just don't think it was going to be successful with what everyone had at the table. I think Ulm was in a strong position to fight Vanheim from a diplomatic standpoint and come out of it very, very strong. Come out of it with most of Jotunheim's territory and bits and pieces of his border with Vanheim, which would have made Ulm a 3-cap nation with a huge power base. And from there, he could have kind of like more negotiating power, more diplomatic power on, well, maybe at that point Pelagia's become a problem, or maybe at that point Arco's become a problem and he and I take on Arco, or something, right? Like, there's a lot of different situations in that. But by going for the throne rush at this point, Ulm basically makes everyone in the game except for me go, nope, we're killing everything that Ulm has to offer, right? And then everything goes bad. So, immediately after that, right, Vanheim is raiding Ulmish territory. I know that the war against Vanheim isn't happening because of the Ulmish throne rush, right? So, I make peace because I have zero interest in fighting Vanheim. Arco's already started attacking Ulm. I have zero interest in fighting Vanheim on my own, or fighting Vanheim with an Ulm that has lost several major armies, right? Because everyone came in on him. So I make peace, Ulm makes peace, and now we start to move into the late game state of where the rest of the game goes. And that is Ulm and Vanheim become a partnership against Arco Vanarus, right? Van being the major, Arco being the major, Ulm being the minor, Vanarus being the minor, right? And I become trapped in my own little world with a Pelagian border. It is also during all of this that Pelagia goes through, loses their original player, gains a sub, loses that sub, gains another sub, right? And because, I think honestly, straight up because of the changes in hands, Pelagia never gets to get going, right? The Pelagian player originally kind of winds up, starts to take some swings, and then is gone. And then the next player steps in and takes turns to get acclimated, starts to do some stuff, and then is gone. And then the next player comes in, and by that time, we're really late in the game, and that window for Pelagia to really take advantage of that early 3 capital start, I think is gone by this point, right? Because it's into year 4 where Arcane Nexus should have gone up around like turn 50 or so, right? Like a really strong Arcane Nexus or Wish Farms or whatever should have been online and really taking Pelagia into the territory of being unmanageable, right? But that just never happens, and I think that never happens because of the change in hands, and the individuals just feeling like, oh, well, I've got to figure out what I'm doing, and then I got to go for some stuff. So this is a long, lawless period where there's fighting back and forth between Arco, Ulm, Arco, Vanarus, and that's pretty much it. And it does last for a long time, and I do need to applaud Vanarus and Arco. They did a great job. Vanarus did a really good job resisting Vanheim, especially considering how little they had to work with at this point in the game. And this, I do think, is probably a point of contention for me. If I had come into the war on the side of Arco at this point in the game, I actually think that we might have made a difference. We were starting to get strong enough to the point to where we might have been able to raid some of Van's territory, take some of their focus, and allow for Arco to do what they needed to do. It was a serious consideration. Here's my issue. Again, my concern was that we would be a junior partner to Arco, and that Van would focus on dealing with me, weather the assault from Arco from behind, and whether or not that ended up being to the detriment of Van, it would most certainly be to the detriment of me. So basically what I'm saying is if I join Arco and we both attack Van, at the best case scenario, right, I was expecting I get a little bit and Arco gets a lot, right? Versus, right, I get trounced and Arco gets huge, right? Like, those were the two situations. I guess the third option is Vanheim could have just kicked the shit out of us and then kicked the shit out of Arco. They seem to be very good at doing that type of thing. So it's that type of scenario, right? Like, I really debated going in on Vanheim with Arco at this point in the game, but I just didn't think that it was going to amount to anything. It's also, I talked about this in my videos, it was also at this point in the game where I was going through a lot of work stuff and real life stuff. So my enthusiasm and my will to try to, like, do things, eke things out, had started to kind of, like, go into the ruts. And that's a big part of these types of games. Big part of playing multiplayer games that take 8 months to finish is you don't always have the time and the energy and the desire to do these things. So kudos to the players that do, right? Because the players that do have that drive and the time and the willpower to see it through can end up being the ones that I think come to the top, rise to the top a lot, right? So instead, what we decide to do is we decide to prepare the Great War versus Pelagia. And that's going to take a long time. The idea being is that while Vanheim and Arco and Ulm and Arco and Vanarus and Vanheim are fighting, while this, 2v2 is going on, if I can start a war with Pelagia and take and win, right, which is a gamble to begin with, but if I can win and then take over Pelagia, then I can be a 4-cap nation with a water base, and then I can go crazy. And so we're going to zoom in on this. We're back up just a little bit. We're going to zoom in, and we're going to watch the beginning of the war against Pelagia. So it happens. We are now, I know because we didn't own Rid, so we're now on Rid. We're now attacking Illidar and Ermithia, and it is a rousing success. The first, 6 turns of the Pelagian War are a great success for us. We knew we probably weren't going to get challenged on land, so that was a solid play for us, period, right? But what was more surprising was the luck, and it was luck, that we had in the water versus Pelagia, because we had in Sacred Lake and I think in Sea of Karassos, we had some really big victories against Pelagia, and then we have a big victory, I think it was either in Narian Sea or Harbor of Copper, and it's at that point that we honestly kind of do a number on Pelagia, right? Arco is still very much alive. You can see in this moment, right? And then we see 3 turns later, we start to see significantly less Arco on the map. And this, I think, actually doesn't show the real story, right? Because this shows flags of who owns the province, but it doesn't show flags for provinces sieged. Almost all of this at this point has a red flag in the game, because if it's not owned by Vanheim, it is being sieged by Vanheim. So it is at that point in the game where I come to the realization of, we had a really fun run against Pelagia, but it's not going to work. We are going to we might win. Pelagia actually gets a solid victory against us, so maybe we don't win, right? But even if we do win, it's going to take another 10, 15 turns, and then we still have to consolidate afterwards. Arco's not going to live that long. We don't have that long. We need to make peace with Pelagia. We need to convince Ulm to fight Vanheim. And this is the last-ditch effort. Probably too late, but maybe us, Ulm, and Pelagia attacking Vanheim can work. But that is the plan. And it goes turns, 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 turns. Nothing, no attacking Vanheim. I mean, actually, that's not true. Pelagia does make a couple of attacks against Vanheim. But what ends up happening it ends up, again, I don't know all of the specifics, but I assume good negotiation on the part of Vanheim and player fatigue and things like that, right? We designed this concept of Ulm, Pelagia, and us attacking Vanheim, right? Probably not going to win, but this is the last-ditch effort. And Ulm drags their feet. And this time I am actually going to call out Ulm on this one. Ulm drags their feet negotiating with I think Vanheim over the acquisition of Arcocephalan territory. So we can see, there's this time period where Ulm for a while, right, is over here, and then this is the time period where it's like, okay, we need to fight against Vanheim. We're all gonna fight against Vanheim. And Ulm's taking Arco territory, not gearing up against Vanheim, although probably still gearing up against Vanheim, but it's taking too long, right? It's Ulm in buying time to get this additional territory is also just giving Vanheim time for more shenanigans as well, right? More consolidation of power. And we end up going across the ocean to grab Obelshin from Arco, trying to kind of like protect it from Van. There's a big scare at this point in the game where Van's like, Nazca has 4 thrones, Nazca's trying to win, and we're like, seriously? Are you kidding me? But it ends up being, unfortunately, that the delay in fighting Nazca means that the fight never really happens. We can see at this point, right? Like, you can see, God, it's been bad for such a long time. Ulm has had such bad dominion for such a long time. And look at freaking, even years ago, Vanheim has had such good dominion control this whole game. Like, Blood Sacrificers, mwah, really, really freaking good. Like, holy crap, maybe too good. Ulm's territory is it really Ulm's territory throughout all of this? This mostly looks like fucking Vanheim Dominion over here. So Ulm is having a horrible time with Dominion. It gets to the end stages of the game with the realization that this triumvirate isn't going to fire, right? Like the triple alliance against Ulm really isn't going to fire happens. Pelagia makes some attacks. Ulm does start making attacks, starts raiding Vanheim borders, but it's too little too late. We start launching attacks. We attack against Mudwoods, and that happens, and we have some limited success there, and then we attack against Cern and Satala, and we've seen how that goes, and it's it's just too little too late. Ulm and Pelagia are dom killed. 2 turns later, my dominion's destroyed. A lot of fun. So much fun. I had a blast in this game. It's crazy to go from a concept of you start playing the game, you're 12 turns in, easy peasy, whatever, right? 12 turns later, you're down to 1 province, really. And then 12 turns later, you're back up to like 20 provinces. It was a wild intro. And it was really, really cool. It also taught me a lot of different things. I learned a lot of different tips and tricks, which I think is very common on almost any multiplayer game that I play. Especially when you're playing with people that are good players, and there were a couple of really good players in this game. So there was a lot of like exchanging of knowledge and ideas and things like that. So that was really fun. But there was also just stuff that I learned from my own personal tendencies, stuff that I learned and got better at, stuff that I got a little worse at, and then had to like pull back into. But I had a really, really, really good time playing Nazca. And more specifically, I just had a really, really good time playing in this game. This was I think, solid game. I have had games in the past where it is somewhat frustrating to play because some of the people in it are not great to play with. Fortunately, I don't have that many of those. And I have some games in the future where things are a little to play because some people are just not fun to play with. But this game was a blast throughout the vast majority of it. I did have opportunities, I think. I think the first 36 turns of the game, because of the decisions that we made picking Nazca and with the bless that we took, I would take a different bless, obviously, if I were to play Nazca again. There are things that I appreciate about them that I would lean into, and I think that would be manifest in the bless itself. But the first 36 turns of the game, I think were basically decided by the idea of let's kill Nazca, right? After that, though, if we really talk about like the next 36 turns of the game, we have the Great Betrayal, right? We have the Olmish Throne Rush, and then we have the Isolation Years, basically, that all kind of like happen in those 36 turns. I say the Isolation Years happened in the 36 turns. Really, it was mostly the Great Betrayal and then the Olmish Throne Rush that happened in those 30 years. The Isolation Years were like the tail end of it, and then into like the next 36, right? So, it is in that time period that I think we had a lot of different opportunities, a lot of moving parts and pieces, a lot of different things that we could have done. But in hindsight, I don't really feel bad about a lot of the choices that I made, or feel like a lot of the choices that I made were wrong. What I do feel like was the biggest issue was around that turn 60 to 70 mark, realizing basically when Ulm failed their throne rush, realizing that the game could go on for another 20, 30, 40 turns, and indeed it did, right? It went on for another 50 turns if we're talking turn 60, another 40 turns if we're talking turn 70. My biggest problem was at that point, I had fatigued. And I was not going into every turn with the concept of, okay, I have a moment. What do I need to do to win this game, right? And we've talked about this in the latest, like the last couple turns of the game, and that is we needed some big gameplay. We needed our own Nature's Bounty. We needed our own Arcane Nexus. We needed our own, empowered Royal Malquis that could go master and slave people, right? We needed some late game tactic to really bring us into a competitive point of power. Even the idea of, oh, let's produce 100 Supayas every turn, and we're gonna have 10 raiding parties of 1 Huron priest and 10 Supayas that we shit out all over the place every single turn. Right? So even some sort of tactic like that would have been a late game kind of like decision of, okay, we have a plan, we have a tactic, we're gonna be able to do something. But I never really got around to that, right? I ended up getting so in the weeds of just turn by turn by turn. And part of that is fatigue, part of that is just how long turns take, right? Like when you're doing a scenario of a turn might take 2 or 3 days in the late game of a game like this. Sometimes we had extensions where sometimes we had turns where it was like 5 or 6 days. And so keeping the attentiveness and the concept of like not just doing your turn and moving on was really difficult at point of time. So what I've actually started doing now, and this is kind of like expressing a lesson that I've learned. What I've actually started doing now is I've started keeping a spreadsheet of like short-term goals and long-term goals, right? With the idea being that here is a short-term goal I am working towards. Here is a long-term goal I am working towards. That way, it doesn't devolve into a scenario of just, I did stuff on the turn, done, right? Every turn, I'm trying to come up with the concept of like, how does this turn further the overall short-term goal or long-term goal, right? I don't know how well that's going to work out. It might be all talk, but it is something that I think is going to be fun. That I think is it. I think that's it for this game. It's been a very fun ride. I had a lot of good times in this game. It's going to be kind of sad to not be playing this game anymore. I say kind of sad. I am kind of sad. I haven't been playing this game for a while. This is a little bit after. But I mean, that's part of Dominions 5, right? Games end. Games take a chunk of your life and then they leave you. Anyways, by the time this video goes up, I believe the tournament will be well underway at that point. We were one of the last games to finish, and So I think as that kind of ended, or as this game kind of ended, shortly after, the tournament game has gone through its picks and bans phase and has initialized, and so that is currently operating. So as this is going up, I'm assuming we might be getting close to the point to where Lucid is publishing turns of the tournament, or a couple of turns of the tournament might already be out by the time this video goes out. So either way, I wanna thank Lucid and his team. Kirby, I think, was the one running the majority of things for the tournament this year, and all of the people. I don't know all of the people by name. I'm sorry, I don't follow. I don't get as involved as I probably should. But everyone did a great job. The tournament, I know people maybe had issues with it, but I thought the tournament went really smoothly, and I thought everyone did a really good job, and I had a blast playing, and it was a very seamless scenario for me. So congratulations to Lucid, Kirby, the team for putting this on. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much for allowing the community to have this type of situation. And best of luck to all the competitors in the tournament. Obviously, I feel like I have a bit of a bias towards Fulik. Fingers crossed, Fulik. I hope you do super well in the tournament. Because if you go win the tournament, then look, I got beat by the tournament winners, so there's less shade there. Anyways. Thanks for hanging out, everyone. That is going to be the end of this video, but there will be other Dominions videos coming if they're not already going live at the same time. So thanks for hanging out, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. It really helps me out. If you'd like to see me live, head over to my Twitch at twitch.tv/thedistanthorizon.